Pull up one tomato plant at the end of the season. Not the prettiest plant, not the tallest one, just one ordinary tomato plant from a backyard bed, a raised planter, or a row beside the fence. Now shake the soil loose from the roots and look closely. If that plant has been treated at the right moments with one simple kitchen ingredient, what you see underground may not look ordinary at all. The roots can be dense, white, fibrous, and spread wide like a living net. Put it beside another tomato planted the same day, in the same soil with the same sunlight, but without that treatment, and the difference can be shocking. Most gardeners spend the whole season looking above the soil. We check the leaves, we count the blossoms, we worry about yellowing, curling, wilting, sun scald, and fruit size. If a tomato looks weak, we spray the leaves. If a pepper refuses to grow, we add fertilizer. If a transplant droops, we water it again and hope it stands back up. But the part of the plant that decides almost everything is hidden. It is not the flower. It is not the fruit. It is not even the leaves. It is the root system, working quietly in the dark, only a few inches below the surface. And today we are going to talk about a recipe that costs almost nothing, takes about 30 minutes to prepare, and uses something many American households already have in the pantry. It is not an expensive rooting powder. It is not a bottle with a shiny garden center label. It is not one of those products that promises explosive growth for $24.99. It is ordinary active dry yeast, the same kind used to make bread rise. Used correctly at the right time, it can help plants build stronger roots, recover faster from transplant shock, and carry a heavier harvest later in the season. But before we get to the recipe, we need to understand why roots matter so much. Because once you understand this, you will stop looking at your garden the same way. A plant with weak roots is always living on borrowed time. It may look green for a while, it may even flower, but the first heat wave exposes the truth. The leaves droop in the afternoon, the blossoms fall, the fruit stays small, the plant needs more water than the others. And no matter how much fertilizer you pour on top, it never truly catches up. That is because fertilizer can only help if the roots are strong enough to take it in. Think of the roots as the engine of the plant. The leaves are the solar panels, the flowers are the promise, and the fruit is the reward. But the roots are the engine. If the engine is small, clogged, or shallow, the rest of the plant can only go so far. A tomato plant with deep, branching roots can handle hot afternoons better. A pepper with a strong root network can hold flowers instead of dropping them. A cucumber with active roots can keep feeding fast-growing vines. A squash plant with a wide root zone can pull water and nutrients from more soil. Everything above ground depends on what is happening below. This is the part most garden products ignore. Walk into any garden aisle in America and look at the shelves. You will see fertilizers for bigger blooms, sprays for greener leaves, boosters for fruit set, liquids for stronger stems, and powders for transplanting. Some work, some are useful, but almost everything is marketed to what you can see. Leaves, flowers, fruit, color, size. The hidden root zone gets much less attention, even though it is where the real decision is made. So the question becomes simple. What does a root need in order to expand, branch, and become strong enough to support a heavy harvest? That is where active dry yeast enters the story. If you buy rooting hormone at a garden center, the active ingredient is often a synthetic version of a plant growth signal, commonly designed to encourage new roots. It can be useful, especially for cuttings, but plants and microorganisms already produce natural root growth compounds. Yeast, specifically Saccharomyces cerevisiae, is one of the most familiar living microorganisms in our homes. It is the same organism that helps bread rise. When awakened in warm water with a little sugar, it becomes active. It feeds, it multiplies, it releases gases and biological compounds. And when used properly in the soil, it can interact with the root zone in ways that are very different from ordinary fertilizer. Now, why is this not sold on every garden shelf as a live root tonic? The answer is not a secret conspiracy. It is simple practicality. Yeast is alive. Once it wakes up, it begins producing carbon dioxide. Put an active yeast mixture in a sealed bottle and leave it there, and the pressure builds. That bottle can swell, leak, or even burst. A product that sits on a shelf for months has to be stable. This recipe works because it is made fresh, used fresh, and applied while the yeast is active. That is exactly why the most useful version of it still comes from your kitchen, not from a plastic jug in a store. So what actually happens when a fresh yeast solution reaches the root zone? There are three main effects to understand. The first is stimulation. Active yeast can produce compounds that are associated with plant growth, including auxin-like substances that support root development. Auxins are part of the plant's internal language. They help tell cells when to divide, stretch, and form new growth. In the root zone, that means more root tips, more lateral branching, and more surface area to explore the soil. A plant does not just need one thick root. It needs many fine roots because those tiny root hairs are where water and nutrients are absorbed most efficiently. The second effect is nutrition. As yeast becomes active, it contributes amino acids, B vitamins, and small amounts of mineral nutrients. This is not the same as dumping a strong fertilizer into the soil. It is gentler. Think of it more like a biological broth delivered to the roots. The plant is not being forced with a heavy dose of nitrogen. Instead, the root zone receives a living mixture that can support early growth and microbial activity. For transplants and young plants, that can be especially useful because the root system is still small and vulnerable. The third effect is protection and competition. The soil around roots is crowded with life. Some microbes are helpful, some are harmless. Some can cause disease, especially when conditions are too wet, too cold, or poorly aerated. When active yeast enters the root zone, it can occupy space and compete with less desirable organisms. It does not make your garden disease-proof, and it is not a miracle cure. But in the early stages, when seedlings and transplants are most vulnerable, a healthier microbial environment around the roots can make a real difference. And there is an even stranger idea that has changed the way scientists think about roots. For a long time, roots were treated like straws. The simple explanation was this: roots absorb water and dissolve minerals from soil. That is true, but it is not the whole story. Researchers have observed that roots can interact with microbes in much more active ways. In what is known as the rhizophagy cycle, roots may take up certain microorganisms, extract nutrients from them, and then release them back into the soil environment. In simple backyard terms, your plant is not just drinking from the soil. It is also interacting with living organisms around its roots in a dynamic exchange. This matters because it changes how we think about feeding plants. We are not just feeding a tomato, we are feeding the soil life that helps the tomato feed itself. We are not just watering a pepper, we are supporting the biological neighborhood around its roots. That is why a living yeast solution is so different from a simple chemical fertilizer. Fertilizer gives nutrients. Yeast, when used correctly, can help wake up biological activity in the root zone. Now let us be honest, garden videos often exaggerate. They promise 10 times more fruit, giant plants overnight, or roots that look like science fiction. That is not how real gardening works. A yeast solution will not fix bad soil, poor sunlight, overwatering, or a plant that is already diseased beyond recovery. But when used at the right time, on healthy plants, in decent soil, it can make a noticeable difference. The improvement usually shows up most clearly at the end of the season when you pull the plant and compare the root system. Treated plants often develop denser, more fibrous roots with more side branching, and that stronger root system can help support better growth above ground. So now let us get to the recipe. You need 3 things: 1 liter of chlorine-free water, 2 heaping tablespoons of active dry yeast, and 1 teaspoon of ordinary white sugar. In American measurements, 1 liter is a little more than 4 cups. If you want to make it simple, use about 4 cups of water, 2 generous tablespoons of active dry yeast, and 1 teaspoon of sugar. This makes a concentrate. You will not apply this concentrate directly to plants. It must be diluted before use. The first step is the water temperature. This is where many people ruin the recipe before it begins. The water should be warm, around 100 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Not hot, not boiling, not cold from the tap. If it is too hot, it kills the yeast. If it is too cold, the yeast stays sleepy and does not activate properly. The easiest test is the back of your hand. The water should feel comfortably warm, like water you might use for bread dough. If steam is rising from the surface, it is too hot. Let it cool. If it feels like plain room temperature water, warm it slightly. Pour the warm water into a clean glass jar or bowl. Add the yeast and the sugar. Stir gently with a clean spoon until everything is mixed. The water will turn cloudy beige. That is normal. Now let us talk about the sugar, because this is important. You are not feeding the plant sugar. Plant roots do not need refined white sugar poured into the soil. The sugar is there to wake up the yeast. It is fuel for the microorganism. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, the yeast uses that sugar to become active. By the time you dilute and apply the mixture, the purpose of the sugar has already been served. Do not seal the jar tightly. Active yeast produces carbon dioxide. If you close the container with a tight lid, pressure can build. Instead, cover the top with a paper towel, a coffee filter, or a clean cloth, and secure it with a rubber band. This keeps dust out while letting gas escape. Place the jar in a warm, dark spot, like a kitchen cabinet, pantry shelf, or inside the oven while the oven is completely off. Direct sunlight is not helpful here. You want the yeast to activate gently. Wait 30 to 40 minutes. When the mixture is ready, you should see foam forming on the surface and small bubbles rising through the liquid. It should smell mildly like fresh bread or dough. If there is no foam at all after 40 minutes, your yeast may be old or dead. In that case, do not use it. Start again with a fresh packet. Old yeast from the back of the pantry may not have enough life left to activate properly. Once the concentrate is ready, dilution is mandatory. Do not pour the concentrate directly onto your plants. It is too strong and can disturb the soil balance around delicate roots. The safe working ratio is about 1 part concentrate to 10 parts water. So if you made 1 liter of yeast concentrate, mix it into about 10 liters of chlorine-free water. For American gardeners, think of adding the concentrate to roughly 2.5 gallons of water. This gives you a diluted root drench that is ready to use. Chlorine-free water is best. Rainwater is excellent if you collect it cleanly. If you use tap water, fill a bucket and let it sit uncovered for about 24 hours so some chlorine can dissipate. This is not about being fancy. It simply gives the living yeast and soil microbes a friendlier environment. Apply the mixture to the soil, not the leaves. This recipe is for roots. Pour it slowly around the base of the plant, letting it soak into the root zone. Do not flood the bed. Moist is good. Waterlogged is not. For a mature tomato, pepper, eggplant, cucumber, or squash plant, about 1 quart of diluted solution is usually enough. For small seedlings or recent transplants, 1 cup is plenty. Now comes the part that matters even more than the recipe. Timing. This is not something you use every week. More is not better. This is a strategic biostimulant for 3 specific moments in the life of a plant. The first application is at transplanting. When a seedling moves from a cell tray, nursery pot, or solo cup into the garden bed, it experiences stress. Roots are disturbed, light changes, wind changes, soil temperature changes, moisture changes. That is why transplants often droop for a few days. A diluted yeast solution applied to the root zone at this moment can help encourage new lateral roots and reduce the stall that often follows transplanting. Instead of sitting there looking tired, the plant can begin exploring the soil sooner. The second application is when the first flowers appear. This is the moment when the plant is deciding how much energy it can afford to send into reproduction. A plant with weak roots may drop blossoms. A plant with stronger roots is better able to support flowering and fruit set. Applying the yeast solution at this stage helps reinforce the root system right when the plant's demand for water and nutrients begins to increase. The third application is when the first small fruits appear. Once a tomato, pepper, cucumber, or squash begins filling fruit, the plant is carrying a heavy load. It needs steady access to nutrients and moisture. If the roots are weak, the plant struggles. If the roots are active and well-branched, it can support that fruit load more easily. This third application helps during that transition from flowering to fruit building. 3 times per season. That is the whole system. At transplanting, at first flower, at first fruit. Not every Saturday, not every time you water, not whenever the plant looks sad. If you use it too often, you risk disrupting the balance of the soil. If you use it too little, you miss the windows where it matters most. Now let us cover the mistakes that can ruin the entire recipe. The first mistake is using water that is too hot. If the water is above about 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the yeast can die. If your mixture smells sour, strange, or never foams, throw it out and start again. Dead yeast will not give you the effect you're looking for. The second mistake is sealing the jar. Never put a tight lid on an active yeast mixture. Gas builds quickly. Use cloth, paper towel, or a coffee filter instead. The third mistake is using expired yeast. If the packet is old and does not foam, it is no longer active enough. Fresh, active, dry yeast is cheap. Use a new packet and save yourself the disappointment. The fourth mistake is storing the finished mixture. This is not a product you make on Sunday and use all month. Once diluted, use it within 24 hours. After that, fermentation can shift in ways that are no longer helpful to roots. Fresh is the point. The fifth mistake is applying it in the middle of a hot afternoon. If the soil is baking, wait. Apply early in the morning or late in the afternoon when the soil is cooler. Roots respond better when they are not under heat stress. The plants that tend to respond best are heavy feeders: tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, squash, zucchini, and corn. Strawberries can also respond well, especially when they are producing runners or recovering after transplanting. Leafy greens like lettuce, kale, spinach, and arugula benefit most during the seedling and transplant stage. Root crops like carrots and beets can benefit early, during establishment, but you do not want to overdo anything that pushes too much top growth. Fruit trees and perennials respond more slowly, but a spring application around the root zone can support fine root development. There is something deeply satisfying about using a recipe that comes from the kitchen instead of a store shelf. The same yeast that lifts bread dough can help wake up the living soil around your plants. It reminds us that gardening does not always require more products, more bottles, or more complicated systems. Sometimes the best tools are simple, fresh, and used at exactly the right time. So this season, do not only look at your tomato leaves. Do not only count your pepper flowers. Do not only worry about fruit size. Think about the engine below. Think about the roots you cannot see, because when the roots are strong, the plant has options. It can handle heat better. It can recover from stress faster. It can feed fruit more steadily. And at the end of the season, when you finally pull that plant from the ground and see a thick, branching root system, you will understand why the work below the soil mattered all along. If you found this helpful, share it with another gardener who keeps buying expensive products but still struggles with weak plants. Try the recipe on a few plants first. Compare them with untreated plants. Pull them at the end of the season and look at the roots for yourself. The garden always tells the truth when you are willing to look below the surface. And in the next lesson, we will talk about another simple homemade recipe that works in a completely different way. One that helps plants hold more flowers when used at the right moment. Until then, keep your soil alive, keep your roots strong, and may your harvest be heavy enough to make every minute in the garden worth it.